there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com and with this week's episode of the Market Monday. I was pushing this back as late as possible to try to get the ban and restricted list. It has just come out. I just did a video with my entire, it's a 20-minute long ramble, that's the best way to describe it, for my thoughts on the ban and restricted. So I'm not going to focus too much on this for this particular episode of Market Monday. Let's just talk about what this affects, what to get out of, what to invest in. That's what people don't understand with the ban list. It also opens up for strategies that are really in good position to now take over. So let's just start off with standard. Emrakul the Promise End is banned. So what card does this hurt most? This hurts Aetherwork Marvel. This is the Aetherwork Marvel's go-to card to finish off the game. I think the archetype is still okay. I think people will still try to push it through. I don't think they'll be going to Ulamog. I think they'll just be going to other cards that... I actually still like my Berzella combo with Aetherwork Marvel. I think that if you haven't looked at that list, just go back and check some Gathering Magic videos out where instead of Emrakul, I used Gisela and Berzella, and it was very powerful. But Emrakul, of course, was just a better way to do that. I still can't think of better cards that want to be cheated in than the Angels. We also get an Angel back from Zendikar, Battle for Zendikar, that whenever you play a Plains, you can return a permanent back from the graveyard to the battlefield, which I thought was insanely powerful to get with Aetherwork Marvel. So everyone knows the pieces out of Aetherwork Marvel will probably go down in value. So let's just go check that out real quick. So these are brought to you by MTG Goldfish. They still... people have said I'm a hypocrite because I said I'd never use the site ever again. I just like Goldfish. Even though they don't like me, I like their service. I don't understand why they don't like me. I don't understand how I'm such a public nuisance in their mind. But anywho, I just think that a very streamlined site is better than trying to fish for a, fish pun intended, for all of the type of data that I want all in like a one-stop shop. And that's what the MTG Goldfish is the best for. Has the best pricing in my opinion using eBay and TCG. Also has the best way of tracking tournament results. And so I don't know. Hopefully someday we can mend our differences. I still really respect Saffron Olive, and it's just sad that things in the past ended like this. But anywho, we'll go on. That's all I'm going to talk about that for the moment. Just thought I'd address that because people have called me hypocrite for it. So anyway, if you click on the metagame tab, we can come up to all the Aetherworks Marvel decks that have had top finishes in the past. And you can really see a trend with them that it's Chandra and Nahiri, that these decks have morphed. When Aetherworks Marvel first started, it was an all-in deck. It was trying to go all-in on Ulamogs and Emrakuls. And that deck failed pretty miserably because it was very easy to disrupt, and you got stuck with Ulamogs in your hand that you could never cast. Well, Emrakul you could always cast because you could easily get to the 7 mana with Emrakul because you'd probably have a Planeswalker, you would have an instant, you would have a sorcery between you'd have a sorcery with the Tune of the Aether, you'd most likely have a land from Vessel hitting a land in the graveyard, you'd have an enchantment, you'd have an artifact, and you'd have a creature. So the Emrakul costing 7 was quite easy to do, and 8 was very attainable if 7 was just slightly out of reach. So the cards I think get hurt the very most for price wise is gonna be Chandra. I think Chandra needs to find a home, and right now Chandra doesn't have a home outside of Aetherworks Marvel. There are a few decks in Modern that use Chandra. Let's just click on Chandra really quickly. So if we click down, by far the deck that plays it the most is going to be the Aetherworks Marvel. This Mardu Vehicles and this Jund, sometimes just don't look at these recent decks, because I bet if we click on these, they're going to be sideboard at best. So no Chandra. Yep, no Chandra, one Chandra in the sideboard of this particular list. To see Chandra in Mardu Vehicles is rare. I rarely ever face off against a Chandra. So then look at Jund, same thing. There is a that's Chandra Pyromaster in the sideboard. I agree with that with Jund. I think Chandra Pyromaster is better because you want to hit land drops. Because some of the finishers with Jund happen to actually be lands like the Raging Ravines, and just the more lands, the merrier. So in my opinion, I actually do like the Pyromaster in a lot of situations in Modern over Chandra Torch of Defiance. This is also legal in Frontier, by the way. Oh, no, it's not. Yes, it is. M15. I believe Chandra Pyromaster was also an M15. Yes, it was. So anywho, I think that without Chandra finding a home, the next we see is red-black aggro. Again, it's not going to be in red-black aggro. There's not going to be a Chandra in the main. Yep, just 2 in the sideboard. That is not enough for Chandra to keep her price tag of the $23. So I think that if you have Chandras, this is a great time to pitch the Chandras. You can actually pick it back up after the dust settles because this might actually be a key card. I think red-black control gets very, or even Mardu control tempting in Aether Revolt because we are getting some premier cards in those colors especially in the control variants. So Yahani's expertise as well as the Fatal Push I think are perfect for these red-black either mid-range or control type decks. So be looking at Chandra. I say sell Chandra in the short term and then pick it up if it does bottom out. But I don't see that anywhere but Chandra to go down in value. So let's look at some other pieces from Aether Marvel to get hit. Of course, Emrakul is a no-brainer sell. Emrakul is around $20 right now. This card will go down to $5 or $6. There will be enough casual appeal, but it will probably go down less than Ulamog because Emrakul isn't seeing much play outside of it. You see it now and again in these other formats like the Vintage and Frontier. Frontier Aetherworks is still played, but in my opinion, it's a terrible deck. We actually did have an Aetherworks Marvel deck take the Frontier tournament at one of our tournaments, but it's because I think it just matched up. I beat it. That's right. It went 3-1 at the one that it went like 1-4 at one of our tournaments and 3-1. Did get some camera time last night on the Harayuya stream, but I don't think it finished high. It just gets beat up by a lot of these really aggressive decks or even tempo-based decks, but it is an option. But I don't think that's enough to hold the price value, so I think we have to see where it didn't see much play, like $12. I think that's probably the right... Yeah, well, this is still like Green-Black Delirium playing it. Or was it... What was the other... Yeah, those were... Or the Teamer Flash was the... Not Teamer Flash, Teamer Merge was playing this right when it was released. That was for the first price hike. Because we know at the Pro Tour Shadows of Innistrad, it was black-white control versus... an Emrakul deck, and it was Emrakul showing off against Liliana, so they had their perfect little flavor win for the Pro Tour as Liliana defeated Emrakul in the finals of the Pro Tour. So Emrakul gone, banned, out of the way. Aetherworks Marvel, of course, it's going to I think it's going down to the $6 mark. Sigarda is pretty much dead now. There's no point to running Sigarda, as Sigarda's only answer was for Emrakul. There might be some other reasons why to run Sigarda. It does dodge some of the 4 toughness removal spells, and it does dodge like a lot of the sweepers like Radiant Flames and Yahini's expertise. Grasp of Darkness, of course. So there might be some decks that will go to green-white mid-range type strategy. I think green-white tokens is actually really good position to come back. I'll say that again. I think green-white tokens is an incredible position to come back, and we'll talk about that in a second when I get on to the other ban. So we have Ishkanah, which is still fine. I actually think Ishkanah is going to be a staple in the format still. It's the premier Delirium strategy. Emrakul was kind of a late addition to those decks. I think it's just fine without them. A lot of the decks have gone over to green-black aggro, but that's because Aetherworks Marvel's one of the most lopsided matchups in Standard was green-black Delirium for Aetherworks Marvel. It was just better. They ran particularly similar, Aetherworks Marvel did, except Aetherworks Marvel had this turn 4 just insane draw, whereas Green-Black Delirium did need to stall until you got Ishkanah, and then stall until you get Emrakul. So with Emrakul out of the way, maybe Green-Black Delirium doesn't have the finisher that it wants, but it might be able to rely on Ishkanahs and Mind Rack Demons to get the job done. And you probably don't even need Mind Rack Demons, just Kalitas. Kalitas back in the format might be enough to push that. Green-Black Delirium was insanely good when Mardu Vehicles and the U-White Flash decks were everywhere. It was this deck in particular that shut that down. So I don't think the Ishkanah is necessarily a sell here. I think that it's still going to be a very, very powerful staple in the format. When people did the polling of what cards they thought were oppressive in the format, Ishkanah was one of them. The other ones got banned, except for Ishkanah and Gideon. I think out of the 5 cards that people were talking about, 3 of them were banned, and Gideon and Ishkanah stayed, were the sole survivors in the ban talk. So The Nahiri is kind of an iffy one because I think the main price for Nahiri is still being pushed by Modern. It's become a staple in Modern, and it does have some legitimate play outside of Marvel. I do think it will get a little bit of a tick down, but we got to see what it was. I think Modern was $18, $15 is probably the right price point for this because Modern, it still sees a lot of play. Frontier, it's awesome in, by the way. Chandra, by the way, is incredible in Frontier. I play 3 of them in my deck. I went 8-0 on MTGO. 8-0 with different decks on Saturday, just goofing around with it in the Frontier just channel on MTGO. So anywho, the Nahiri, or Chandra, is a pivotal piece in that, and so is Nahiri in my Frontier deck. But in Standard, I don't know if there's enough cards to really push this over the top. People are talking about the Saheeli and Nahiri being in kind of a good stuff type deck, trying to get the infinite combo. It's not proven though, so I don't think I'd invest in any things that aren't proven. And Nahiri does get hurt by Marvel being completely dead and not wanting the card. I still think Nahiri's great. In my Bracella Gisela combo, Nahiri was a huge piece just for finding the right cards in the graveyard. So Marvel, of course, will take a hit. Marvel is already low. It probably will go down to this, I would say, this $5, $6 mark again. I think that Marvel, after it bottoms out, is going to be a great card to pick up because I guarantee you Nicol Bolas is going to be insanely powerful in Amonkhet. It's going to want to be cheated, and it's going to have a high converted mana cost, like 7 or 8, and Aetherix, and it's going to be an I win button just like the last one was, and Aetherix Marvel is going to be the perfect way to cheat it in. So pick these up once this card goes, once the people have the sell-off for the Marvel. Try to target them in 3. I would say you could probably find some people really ditching them at 3. That would be my price point that I'd want to target it. If it doesn't go quite down that, I think picking up for 5 and below is a pretty good, that's fine in my opinion. Game Trail gets really hurt. This card went up, spiked in value just because of Marvel. It's going to go back to the $2 mark. Get rid of them. It is not played in Frontier at all. It was mainly just the Aetherix Marvel. Green-red energy a little bit, but it's the lackluster one out of the two. I think the other one is better, the one that the fixed land, or check land, whatever you want to call it. So Game Trail, I think, is a sell-off as well. So on to the next ban list is Smuggler's Copter. This one is very, very interesting. I've talked about it pretty extensively in my ban list update. I think that it's okay either way. I think it was fine for the format because it was fair. Everyone had access to it, and it was a very versatile card. So the best way to take care of Smuggler's Copter was Smuggler's Copter. And this beginning ban really affects one deck that doesn't see a ton of play. The other decks I think are fine because they were just chucking it in. And that is the Mardu Vehicles. I think Mardu Vehicles gets incredibly nerfed because of this deck. They do get a few nice vehicles out of the A3 Volt, and I also think that the archetype is still solid without Smuggler's Copter, but it was definitely Smuggler's Copter that pushed it over the top. And Smuggler's Copter was a Liliana killer. It was the only way that they had any chance of, and it had really good synergy even with Gideon by creating a token then to crew the Smuggler's Copter to really protect Gideon. And yes, they do have access to a few other vehicles like the Cultivator's Caravan, but it really hurts the vehicle strategy as far as Depala is concerned. This one right here isn't running Depala. This is a Mardu Vehicles. So I think just the Depala and the Veteran Motorist get hurt and might not even be necessary. There is kind of a dwarf sub-theme coming out in the next set, and even more vehicles, of course. But basically what I would say is Mardu Artifacts is still a viable format. So Scrap Heap Scrounger, Toolcraft Exemplar, and Inventor's Apprentice are still fine. They're all really low. I don't think that any of these would be a sell-off. Maybe Scrap Heap Scrounger will get a hit. Of course, the Smuggler's Copters will get completely destroyed. I think you should pick these up as well if they go down to under $2, like Hangerback Walker did, after it basically received the equivalence of a ban, meaning there was a lot of exile-type cards that made it obsolete. I think Smuggler's Copter will follow suit and go down to $2, and that's a great time to pick them up for Frontier, because they're still good in Frontier, and they are so fair in Frontier. There are so many answers to Smuggler's Copter in Frontier. I love it when my opponents play Smuggler's Copter, because then I either Crackling Doom it or Kolgan's Command it, and it just feels so awful for my opponent getting 2 for 1, either taking damage and destroying their Copter, at instant speed, or I mean, Kolaghan's Command is the best because you kill whatever's crewing it, as well as the Smuggler's Copter. The best thing that happened was I was able to, what I do is I was able to kill a Smuggler's Copter and a card that was being in Soul Artifact. I think it was an Ornithopter being in Soul Artifact and a Smuggler's Copter all in response to the Soul Artifact. Just felt so dirty. But I think that Copter doesn't affect this archetype too much. It's still going to be fine. We're still going to see these red-white Gideon based decks, and they're probably going to want the artifact sub-theme with the Thraben Inspector and the Toolcraft Exemplar, Scrappy Scrounger. So I think this archetype is fine. I think the one that really gets hurt is the Zombies list. Do we even have a Zombies list up here to even look at? I haven't seen one in quite a while. This kind of red-black aggro can be morphed over to a prized amalgam list where they run the Smuggler's Copter to help fill up the graveyard, and Crypt Breakers. It was a popular format for a while, but yeah, it's completely has gone away. The Smuggler's Copter hurts this deck a bit, but I still think that it is very viable. I don't know, they have the Scrap Heap Scroungers, they still have the Courier. It might make it the Metalcraft-esque type feel to it a little bit narrow. Still have the Pian Crondalar. I think what this deck does is just throws in the Reckless Bushwhackers and calls it good. I like the Reckless Bushwhacker anyway. Bloodhall Priest gets really, really hurt from this. So does Fiery Temper. So I think that they do morph back away from the Bloodhall Priest. This card doesn't hold any value though, but if it did, this would be a sell-off card. And Fiery Temper, of course, will not be nearly as good. I think that it will still be viable in a deck like this, and it's still a great card, but it might just be completely replaced with Incendiary Flow in a deck like this. So Incendiary Flow gets a lot better, too, with the green-white human that brings back a 2-drop. I think that it's going to be... Incendiary Flow is going to pick up in value. So, anyways, this is just... This deck probably gets hurt the most by Smuggler's Copter. The Prize Amalgam version gets hurt by far the most. So speaking of other decks that use the Smuggler's Copter very effectively is White Blue Flash. It's really good against opposing Liliana-based decks or even Nahiri and Chandra-based decks because it's hard to kill the Smuggler's Copter. I think the Smuggler's Copter is a huge blow for this particular deck. But they were basically just using the Smuggler's Copter to keep in tempo with the other Smuggler Copter-based decks. So this archetype worked before Smuggler's Copter. I think it will work after Smuggler's Copter, except, here's a big exception, Reflector Mage is the last card that is banned in the standard format. So Reflector Mage being banned really kills this deck. I think that they have to go back to the drawing board to how this deck is going to work without these Smuggler's Copter and the Reflector Mage. Protecting Gideon just got a ton harder to do. So what cards do I think really, really shine in the absence of Reflector Mage? 2-drops. Spellcaller can still hit them, but Spellcaller is something that can be removed, and then the value gets really messed up. Reflector Mage really, and Smuggler's Copter, really kills Duskwatch Recruiter, Tireless Tracker, and Sylvan Advocate. So those are the cards that I think are destined to have a huge price. Maybe I can spell Sylvan Advocate correctly. Sylvan. This card completely went away because of Reflector Mage and Smuggler's Copter. Look at this card was complete dominance right here. $8 was the price tag for the Sylvan Advocate at one point in time. And then it just got buried because, and then you look back down here, it doesn't see any play in Standard. Here's a white-green list. I think white-green is going to be our new overlords. This green-white tokens is going to be back in full force. This works perfectly. It does get hit with Smuggler's Copter as well, but everyone does. So it's kind of moot for this type of deck. So this is kind of the blue-white flash, but instead of running Reflector Mage, it runs Sylvan Advocate and has access to like Nissa and have this entire tokens-based strategy. This doesn't have Hangerback Walker. Hangerback Walker was a really good piece back when this was popular as a way to beat up on the Collected Company decks. And I think actually when Reflector Mage was printed is when the Coco deck started to get an advantage over the green-white tokens. This was a #1 deck at one point, and the Sylvan Advocate was so good because it blocked basically every opposing card and survived, and then later on became a 4/5. So I think that both green-black and white-green becomes so much better with the Reflector Mage out of the way. Grim Flayer gets so much better. Duskwatch Recruiter, another card, completely terrible against Reflector Mage and Spellqueller and Smuggler's Copter. Like everything that did not have reach just looked stupid looking at the Smuggler Copter flying overhead. And so if there is one card that I would say this is going to be the big winner, it's going to be the Sylvan Advocate. These type of strategies, we're all going to hate this card again just because of how oppressive it's going to be to try to attack through it. So now your Mardu Vehicles decks are going to have to deal with a 2-3. Yes, it's going to be kept in check by Fatal Push, but Fatal Push decks are probably going to want to play Sylvan Advocate just the way that it scales so well. So I think that this opens up green, blue. It actually opens up, here's another deck that I think is going to be really, really good. It might be some Eldrazi decks. Eldrazi decks were really hurt by the blue-white. The Temple of the Blue-White just made Thought-Knot Seer look so terrible compared to going Spellqueller into Gideon. Well, now, if this format slows down, I think Thought-Knot Seer gets a ton better too. So I think we can kiss this whole metagame goodbye. I think that Blue-White Flash was the kind of big, bad, consistent deck on campus that everything had to be able to deal with. But this deck has to adjust to how it works. And I think that it might go to there was like a mono white list that was basically this blue or white shell, but it did use Smuggler's Copter as well. Had Toolcraft Exemplar here, still had the Selfless Spirit, the Thalias, and was I think running the Scrapheap Scrounger, and then Gideon. It was kind of more an aggressive deck that tried to push through, get out its threats before Reflector Mage and Spellqueller. So people might go towards that type of deck. But yeah, this opens things up a ton. It actually opens up ramp strategies for Ulamog up a lot too, because this was the preferred counter magic of choice. So it's going to be very, very interesting how the metagame adjusts. I think we should go back to looking at kind of week one, but then week one was so much determined by Smuggler's Copter and the vehicles-based decks. Yeah, it is just all over the place with how this is going to pan out. I really like green-white humans, so look at Thalia's Lieutenant. I think Thalia's Lieutenant is see if we can pull up some of the green-white decks that we're starting to see a lot of play in. There was one at I know Craig Wesco was on one not too long ago. I got Craig Wesco and Sam Black at Grand Prix Denver like a month ago. But yeah, so Duskwatch Recruiter, Tyler's Tracker, Thalia's Lieutenant, all of these just got so much better. And compact that we have now a 2-drop, or 3-drop, that then brings back a converted mana cost 2 or less, any permanent back to the battlefield, is huge. So this is going to be an archetype, I think, that is here to stay. So be looking forward to both the white-green humans, white-green tokens, green-black Delirium should be back in full force as the premier Ishkanah deck, and maybe even Jund Delirium. They might be just saying, okay, we just won't go Marvel. We'll just take Marvel and Emrakul out and go that shell and whatnot. So those are my picks. I think those are the cards. Let's just look over. I know that I'm kind of rambling on here already at 20 minutes, but let's just go over the price list of like the Shadow of Resort Innistrad, for example, and see how well it actually, some of these cards. Westville Abbey decks get so much better again. I know that the Yahini's expertise could keep it back. Thing in the Ice might be the premier card for actually slowing down these aggro-based decks. So we're looking at like Dynavolt Tower type decks. You just need to go look back at the cards that were good before the Aetherworks Marvel and the U-White Flash deck became so oppressive, and invest in those cards. Always watching. Perfect card, I would say, to get in on. So anywho, if you have any specific cards out of the Shadows of Innistrad and Battle for Zendikar and even Kaladesh. Kaladesh is kind of weird because it's still going to be opened, so I don't like investing in Kaladesh cards right now. But since Shadows of Innistrad and Battle for Zendikar blocks stick around for an entire year until next September, I think that there is that point in time that you can invest in those cards. Even cards, here we go, Ruinous Path, speaking of sorcery speed cards, that get quite good now that those are out of the form. I mean, that Smuggler's Copter and Reflector Mage are out of the format. All right, on to the modern. Gitaxian Probe ban. This really hurts Infect, but I think Infect is still okay. It really hurts Death Shadow. I think Death Shadow might not be playable now. I think that was a very key card for Gitaxian Probe. So let's look at all the decks that are running Gitaxian Probe. Geez, I didn't have time to even sell these stupid things. I knew I should have. I think we did get rid of most of them because I just hated this card. So Infect, Sneak. Oh, so let's see. We have Infect and Death Shadow would be the two big decks. I bet this BRG is also a Death Shadow base strategy. Yeah, this is still Death Shadow. So Infect and Death Shadow are the premier cards that run Gitaxian Probe. The Prowess decks as well get hurt. I think this is actually a huge blow to the Prowess decks. So the Thing in the Ice and Bedlam Reveler might get a hit. I still think they're fine. They still have, maybe they just go up more counts of Sleight of Hand or more counts of Vapor Snag to compensate there. But it is one of their free spells that really does, yeah, because that's basically, what do they call that? Suicide Blue is, I think, is what the nickname for the UR Prowess started to become. Grixis Delver, this hurts because it gives Snapcaster Mage a target as well as something for Delver's Secrets to actually flip off, and allows their land count to be very, very low. Because any deck that does use Gitaxian Probe, now we're actually looking at this deck and it's not running Gitaxian Probe, but usually Gitaxian Probe based decks can run a lower mana count because those are things that can be cycled for 0. But Death Shadow, I think you should entirely get out of. I don't think it operates without Gitaxian Probe. I think it's too pivotal of a piece for Gitaxian Probe. In fact, I don't think you should sell off. I think Infect is still fine without Gitaxian Probe. It gets a lot more fair to play against because now they don't have perfect knowledge, so you can kind of feign that you have the card to get rid of their, if they try to go all in. But this was way too pivotal of a piece for Death Shadow. I think we're going to go back to more traditional Zoo decks without Gitaxian Probe. I think, though, with Fatal Push being in Modern, it gives Jund and a few other, these Abzan especially. I think Sultai is the big winner with the... I was going to talk mainly on Kaladesh spoilers, or Aether Revolt spoilers, for the Modern format, just because I think it gets mixed up a ton. Snapcaster Mage base... So Jund... So take the Jund shell, and then add Snapcaster... Or drop red, and get Snapcaster Mage, and I think that's what Fatal Push is for Modern. So Tassiger, so Grixis shell more like, no, definitely Jund, kind of a mix between Jund and Grixis. So you get the best of the green, which is Goyf and Grim Flare, and then you tack on Snapcaster Mage and Fatal Push, and I think that's enough removal between Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, and Murderous Cut to have a very good strategy. Of course, Lightning Bolt is just so versatile to go to the face, but those archetypes are definitely something that I think you should look at for the Modern format. So that'd be my pick, is just to get out of Death Shadow. They're incredibly expensive. All of the pieces like the Street Wraith, the Urza, the Bauble, the Mishra's Bauble, might just get hit. If this is the only, I believe Mishra's Bauble is this the only one that's played in. Yep, Death Shadow, a few Lantern controls, Abzan. Is there one of Mishra's Bauble to try to get a Grim Flare online? Yeah, that's not enough. Definitely not enough reasons to keep a $20 Mishra's Bauble. All right, so the last ban card before I make this video too long is the Golgari Grave Troll. On my video, kind of discussing the Golgari Grave Troll, I thought that maybe they should have tried like Insolent Neonate, because that's the card that leads to the broken draws and is also a common. So you don't get a lot of people like really upset that their $10 card or whatever Golgari Grave Troll is up to goes away. But anywho, let's look at some lists here for the Golgari Grave Troll for the Dredge and see exactly. I still am under the assumption that the Golgari Grave Troll still works just fine, or the Dredge deck still works just fine. It basically was a nerf from Dredge, go from Dredge 6 to Dredge 4, because now they're just going to use the Dredge 4, and so this deck can't have as explosive draws, but it still does have the ability, so it does really hurt the consistency of Dredge. So I still think it's fine, though. This shell is still fine. So it will be able to just replace the 4 here with the 4 of the 2-drop. The Golgari Grave Troll was kind of a menace versus like decks that when they decided to hardcast Golgari Grave Troll, it came in as a huge creature, and there were some decks that just could not handle that. It's one of the more awkward thing with Skred, because sometimes you'd have to use the Skred early to get rid of, or the the Relic of Progenitus early, just to get rid of, like, if your opponent hit like 3 prized amalgams or a couple of bloodghast, you used it right away, and you'd actually be able to take care of like amalgams even with cards like Anger, and then eventually Golgari Gravetroll with even Narcomoebas in the graveyard would be enough to get like a big beater for 6 mana or for 5 mana. And so there is that. The alternatives are quite weak dredgers and don't really have a body, and so I can see this really hurting Dredge. I've played it a little bit and I've played it against it a lot. So usually Golgari Gravetroll isn't a card that beats me very often with the type of decks I play, but I'd like to hear some Dredge players to see how often they actually win with a Golgari Gravetroll, if attacking you with a big body is actually something they do. Conflagrate, between early damage from the prize amalgams and the bloodghast and late damage from the Conflagrate, is usually how this deck wins. And I still think the pieces are still there for Dredge, and I think the hate cards are the ones you should sell out, because it just becomes a lot more inconsistent that you'll see this at tournaments. So I think the big card to get rid of is Leyline of the Void. This card spiked up to, I believe, $20 recently. Yeah, 19, $20. And without Dredge in the format, this card gets a lot worse as far as people playing it in their sideboards. So you can see there's so many decks that do play it in their sideboards. Legacy still loves it because it's still the go-to card to deal with Legacy Dredge. And it's very good in the mirrors, of course. That's why this particular deck has 4 of them in the sideboard. But I think that people can now rely on the ooze as just a good way to deal with other graveyard-based strategies, and they don't have to go all in on the Leyline of the Void. So that would be the card that I think gets hurt the most. Decks that really suffer from Dredge could start to pick up in value or just playability. You can see it's the most played deck right now. And so some of the slower based decks, I think Nahiri Jeskai could come back, because that was one of the matchups that was particularly, it was either draw your Rest in Peace or not. And I think that was just that's why Nahiri Jeskai went away, is it's just so bad versus the Dredge. So most of these decks can interact quite well with Dredge. So Tarmogoyf the Abzan has and Jund have ample ways to exile graveyards and main board. So they both have Scavenging Ooze main board, and a lot of decks that just work very, very well that can combat Dredge right off the bat. Infect can easily race it. Tron, it's same thing. Tron has access to so many cards that just can exile the graveyard and exile once they're out with the Ugins, which can be very, very devastating for Dredge to have their Dredge go off on turn 3, for example, and then have Ugin get rid of all the bloodghasts and the prized amalgams. Burn can just easily outrace Dredge. Dredge does a lot of fetch shock. Burn can do so. Same thing with the Death Shadows aggro decks. They can just punish Dredge early before that they can fully get going. Affinity, same thing. Affinity goes wide. It can actually go toe to toe. And even decks like the Eldrazi and Taxes, which I don't see a lot of those, or even Bant Eldrazi, just can get a jump and really punish the Dredge with the hate cards. So I think this does open us up a lot more to the mid-range strategies, because both Death Shadow aggro and Dredge get hurt. So Ad Nauseam, I think, gets a ton better with this. So as much as I hate the deck, I think you're going to see a lot more Ad Nauseams and a lot more Scapeshift. I think Scapeshift is playable again with this recent ban list. It still does have a lot of hate from like Eldrazi Taxes and a few other decks. That Scapeshift just seems too slow right now. And 2 of its worst matchups, I believe, are gone. And yeah, so this should shake up the metagame quite a bit. Even though Dredge hasn't put up a lot of numbers in some of these more competitive like Grand Prix and things like that, it is still, every tournament you go to, you're going to see a Dredge, so you have to be prepared for it. And that's a huge sideboard slot to have to throw in the Rest in Pieces in the ley lines. And it's just something that I think you can safely get rid of both those cards. Rest in Peace especially, just because I think it's too rich for my blood to rely on a printing in Modern Masters 2017. So anywho, if I missed anything on this, please feel free to put it in the comment section below. What are your predictions for a new standard and modern metagame? Am I off? Am I right? Is the Aether Revolt really going to shake things up enough? That's the one thing that I said in my ban list video, is I'm like, wow, we had a very powerful cards coming out of a turn 4 infinite combo coming out in Aether Revolt. Did they pull the trigger too quickly on these cards, especially since these Reflector Mage type cards? Well, actually, Reflector Mage is probably good for that infinite combo because people were talking about the Theladar Cat just basically bouncing a Reflector Mage, and then you're having like a turn 3 Reflector Mage into a turn 4 Reflector Mage. Anyway, so let me know in the comment section below what you think about the overall health of the metagame. Is this going to be enough to shake it up? Or if there's any other particular targets you should be investing in due to these ban list announcements. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.